our role today, and I know this resonates a lot with you, Senator, is really to shape a transatlantic relationship that is fit for the 21st century. The old playbook does not apply anymore. And so it's about being innovative, creative, and shaping a modernized transatlantic partnership so that Americans and Europeans can address some of the most pressing issues. GMF focuses particularly on security and defense, on trade and tech competitiveness, but also on how the shifting global order and shifting alliances are also reshaping the transatlantic partnership as well. I'm also thrilled to have you, Senator, because you are an alumnus of GMF. And so one of my mission here as I begin my tenure as president of the German Marshall Fund is really to have more of our alumni policy conversations, because you bring a lot. You bring a lot to GMF and you bring a lot to the broader transatlantic conversation. And I remember, because people still talk about you, when you finished a program which was called the Transatlantic Inclusion Leader Network of GMF, you actually hosted in Phoenix, Arizona, the reverse, which is the European delegation of the Marshall Memorial Fellowship. And people still talk. So I know,
because I took him to some good Mexican restaurants. That's why.
So that's why. It's probably why. But I think these people-to-people connections
100%,
are absolutely critical. And so that's also something we're doing. My colleagues here in Washington and in Europe is really to put the emphasis on the next generation, because they are the next leaders of the transatlantic relationship. And so these types of engagements and giving back is really important. So I wanted to thank you for that. With that, Senator, I wanted to briefly introduce you, because you have a very interesting journey. And that explains why you are, in this position today. Throughout your different position in Congress, you have been focusing on many critical domestic and foreign policy issues, national security, veterans issues. Yourself, you are a Marine Corps veteran, and that I think has certainly shaped the way you see the world and the role of the United States in the world and in alliances. You became the highest-ranking Latino on the House Armed Services Committee. You were the chairman of the Baltic Caucus, and you created the Baltic Security Initiative, which also resonates with a lot of the work we're doing here at GMF. And then in past November, you won one of the most hotly contested and closely watched major races in the United States, i.e. Arizona. And you became Arizona's first Latino senator. You are also a leading foreign policy voice. And this is where I really want to focus on the conversation today. You have been outlining regularly your vision of U.S. foreign policy, of U.S. leadership, as also being rooted in American values. And so my first question to you is really about the domestic foreign policy nexus. Frame it that way. Given your long-standing emphasis on bridging domestic divides, how do you see the shifts in American society on economic insecurity, debates on immigration, debates on the U.S. global leadership, or even U.S. role in traditional alliance? How do you see all of that influencing the broader U.S. foreign policy priorities? And I would say reprioritization over these past 10 to 15 years.
1 minute?
As you wish.
Yes. Well, there's always been a vein of isolations within the United States. I mean, it goes back to even our founding fathers. As soon as we separate ourselves from England, we were having debates whether we should get involved in the French Revolution, we should get involved in European wars. And it has always existed, and we've always swung back and forth, and then it will find itself into the economic stream, whether it comes to tariffs or it comes to other type of industrial policy. The one thing I think that has never occurred is that largely that kind of vein of isolation was never had full power in any party. in modern time, especially in the post-World War II. You had, small movements within the Republican Party, largely led by the John Birch Society, within the kind of Democratic Party, more from the left-leaning, kind of more, I would say, pro-communism wing of the party, ideological wing of the party, that wanted us to disengage us from kind of the Cold War efforts. But again, they never had full control. What has occurred recently, because of how this president has been acting, is that they now have control, and they've not only put the people in power to actually move them in that direction, at least ostensibly, but they're actively going and kind of eroding the kind of infrastructure that we've all been relying on for many years that would supersede administrations, right? So that's the things like USID, professional staff, the State Department, treaties, obligations, things of that nature. And so it has been a huge whiplash, I think, for a lot of us that have particular interest in foreign policy, because we believe good foreign policy means we have good domestic policy and good national security. But it's a lesson. We do have to take care of our domestic policy, I think, in order for us to make sure we also have the willingness of the American public for us to keep engaging as much as we do on foreign policy. And some of that does come to simple things like migration, irregular migration. Some of that does come, dealing with, the inequality that has existed in this country for quite a while now. There is no logical reason that our international standing relationships is somehow causing inequality, but the fact that the American public thinks that is taking the focus away from elected officials instead of them is what causes a lot of this backlash. And we've already seen multiple times when we were making arguments about USID, like, well, why are we giving money to them? We need X, Y, Z, right? And the argument is very simple, but the answer is actually not very simple. What I hope will occur, and I think you're starting to see some from this administration, is that they realize they actually can't disengage. It's impossible to disengage from a world that we're very much an integral part of and we created. I think also now you're seeing a lot of the policymakers kind of at the Senate level that are starting engaging even more. I just took a recent trip to Slovakia. I just saw the ambassador somewhere. Thank you again. You guys were great hosts. And then we went to Germany. We went to London, and in there we had engagements with government the whole time. And what I saw was this opportunity with some of my Republican colleagues where they're actually making connections with these foreign politicians and ministers. As a matter of fact, some of them just recently were back in town, and I'm not jealous, but they didn't reach out to me. But they did reach out to the Republicans we introduced them to. So this is something that we're going to have to continue, I think, really investing in the time of Trump. Making politics needs to be personal. Well, foreign policy, I think, needs to be personal too. And I think that will help us kind of survive this big and unfortunate bump that exists right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You've mentioned your trips to Europe. I want to get to the core of what GMF does, which is the Transatlantic Alliance and the Transatlantic relationship. And there seems to be, beyond the heightened debates on the Transatlantic Alliance that you're having here, but also partly in Europe, a sort of consensus that we need to move towards a more balanced transatlantic alliance. And you said so. Yes, the U.S. cannot disengage and is realizing day after day. And U.S. crisis diplomacy is still vital and critical. But at the same time, Europeans need to step up, and they need to step up for their own security and defense, i.e. Ukraine and the recent conversations we've been having. So what's your vision on that? I would rather talk of responsibility sharing than burden sharing. I don't like the word burden sharing because it's about taking responsibility, sharing this. What's your vision? And does that make today a bipartisan consensus between Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, nobody wants to be a burden. I mean,
exactly.
if you're in a relationship, you're the burden. You're in trouble, right? But I do feel conversations with our European partners that they understand that they will need to pick up more of the slack. But it doesn't mean that the United States doesn't still show the leadership they need to, the kind of convening power that it needs to. And there's just some things that we can do that other entities just can't. Our airlift capability, our cyber capability, our intelligence gathering capability. That's something that Europe cannot replace right away, nor do I think that we should have them invest in that, because it's not necessarily something you can really scale up fast enough. But what we do want to see, I think, is an understanding that European defense is integral to Europeans as much as it is to us, and that it's not just a bunch of countries that are putting together 2%, 3% of their GDP, but there's an actual vision of real European integrated defense, which we're going to be a part of no matter what, but that is not solely dependent on hundreds of thousands of American troops having to surge through Western Europe in order to meet the mark. At least for a lot of us too, as you mentioned, I worked on the Baltic Security Initiative, and it was a security initiative that I created with another Republican named Don Bacon. If you ever have a chance to get him here, he's a great person too. And that was after talking to some of our Baltic allies about what a future war would look like. This is prior to Ukraine. And one of the things that we identified was that Russia likely would actually just push through the Baltics and just hold ground and sue for peace. And then basically challenge the US and our Western lines to basically go into a kinetic confrontation with Russia, and betting that we would not be willing to do that. And so one of the things that we worked with our Baltic allies on was that we will give you money to help become more, I would say, dense, so they're not as easily to cut through. But you need to do this in a manner where I don't want to be paying for the Lithuanian Air National Guard, the Latvian Air National Guard, and the Estonian Air National Guard. You need to have a real idea of your joint defense, because when Russia comes, they're not going to stop any of your borders. That's a really good example of what we need to be looking forward into the future. And I think we have a really good opportunity with addition of Sweden and Finland. We have some very great capabilities, a very dedicated front that goes from the Arctic Circle down to the Aegean Sea, but now to move it to actual functionality. And I think if we have some movements to actual functionality and capabilities of a European defense initiative, I think you'll build more confidence. And the days of talking again to some of my friends across the Atlantic, the days of, I think, the Americans being afraid of Europe having their own capability and ability to deter without us is no longer a fear of us. And I think largely because we are still value aligned, versus in the past, maybe we weren't, but I think we are very much value aligned, that we're not afraid of a strong European military capability.
Thank you for that.
If you guys are wondering, I have a 24-month-old, and she was in bed with us last night, so
yeah.
You guys aren't boring me. You're good.
I've experienced that.
Yes.
As well. So no worries. So we're, in June, there's this NATO summit coming up. I like the way you framed it, which is it's less about how much you spend, but how you spend, right? And so a related question to you is, you're saying the debate, the way the U.S. looks at a European pillar within NATO is shifting. Does that also apply in terms of Europeans having also to invest in their own industrial base? Because this is where it gets sticky, right? It's Europeans.
Oh, no. We're Americans. We want it both ways. We want you guys to defend yourself. We want you to buy all of our weapons. But to be honest, I think there is a way for us to actually have it both ways, where we have co-production. And some of it has to also be a trust-building exercise, because a lot of our allies are afraid of the so-called kill switch, that if we disagree with you on your actions, that we're going to disable some capability, which, at least when looking at the F-35, that doesn't exist, or anything else. But doubt is there. And so the best way, I think, to reduce doubt is to have real collaboration and on some of these systems. And for the problems of the F-35, you'll find the F-35 in every part of the country, of the European mainland, that is being a part of it, that's being built. But I think going forward, something that will help indigenous industries, become stronger, be able to innovate, is for them to be working with U.S. companies for some joint programs. And some of them, maybe we shouldn't. There are some very good European platforms that are better than the United States and that are actually work better within the construct of European defense, and we shouldn't fault people for using that. But I think there's a way for us to be able to do both on some platforms, maybe not all platforms.
Thank you for that.
If we go at the thing in our conversation today,
how do you see things moving forward? Because this again is where you said you used the word co-production. I think there's a need of cooperation, American and Europeans, in terms of finding the best solution for Ukraine. And what role can the context play within this context?
I mean, a lot of this is dependent on where President Trump feels his relationship with Putin is, and not entirely based on kind of the overall security construct, unfortunately. And a lot of the politics that does exist in this country, unfortunately, are kind of people to people, and sometimes it's not really good people to good people. But Donald Trump is, I think, at least now moving more towards a at least Ukraine neutral position, largely because he feels that Putin has played him, and a lot of us are certainly trying to feed into that, and to some regards, he has. He's been holding back. As of today, I'm sure Putin hasn't shown up at Istanbul unless there's a tweet that went out or something like that. And while trying to engage in ceasefire, Putin massacred these poor families on the way to Easter Sunday Mass. All these things that I think are finally kind of playing into it. The question is now, can we, with the mineral deal also, can we get a understanding from the president? The best way to bring this to conclusion is for Putin to understand that there is no timeline for him that he can outlast. And prior to the election, my opinion, the Russian mindset was, let's get through the election. We will then force Ukraine to deal with peace because the United States is going to entirely back out. I think now, it is my opinion that we're in a better position when it comes to the president. The Congress has not actually changed its position on Ukraine. It is still a very strong pro-Ukraine Congress. The problem is the functionality of how to pass a bill makes it very difficult because there's small margins within the House that all they require is like 4 Republicans to say no, and we lose any type of Ukraine aid. In the Senate, you probably can pass it even with a filibuster, but again, it has to come and drive in the House. I think the more the president starts becoming at least Ukraine neutral, the more likelihood there is some type of movement. Now, I think there also could be this larger conversation and a kind of a broader conversation about maybe that we take a beat back for 1 year or 2 years, and we have the European Union step up with the funding, or other allies like South Korea. Qatar seems very nice in giving away stuff now. I mean, we could just see if they could reach out and send some stuff. But figuring out a way that we can essentially show the American public and some of our Republican allies that like this is a joint operation. The European Union, NATO, other allies are putting in $15 billion this year. We're going to match this in 2 years. Something like that I think would be, and it has been done in the past, but something like that can actually be very good in terms of building that last bridge to get us fully integrated back into the fight with Ukraine.
A couple of days ago, the United States and China signed this. How do you read this deal? And has been a recurring debate also in the transatlantic relationship since the so-called, pivot to Asia and everything, which, dates back to a longer period than today. Do you see a role for a partnership between the United States and Europe when dealing with China? Because again, this is, I think, a space where we share a lot of strategic interests, but it doesn't seem that we are true incorporating. So how do you do first the deal? And then as we look at the year to come, how can we strengthen European-U.S. cooperation in dealing with China?
Yeah, I mean,
The president absolutely lost that deal. If that was the art of the deal and he was reading it, he'd call himself a loser. And for the consumer, 30% is not good. Like as I said, I have a baby coming June 12th. So I'm buying cribs, strollers, and the baby tax is real. And whether we like it or not, 97% of all those strollers that are sold in the United States are made in China. And like, I don't understand what he thought the deal was, because like the consumer is still going to pay that tax. And he folded because he was told by some of the largest retailers in this country that they were 4 weeks away from empty shelves. And the American psyche freaked out about COVID and empty shelves. Imagine what would happen again under his administration. And he remembered that. So he capitulated. China won that round. And worst of all, they learned a lot. They learned a lot about our weakness. They learned a lot about how to manage, expectations. And they learned also that our economic alliances aren't as strong as our military alliances. And largely it's due to this administration. There is no way on God's green earth we should have gone to start an economic war, if you want to call that at all, with China without us having the second largest world economy next to us, fighting next to us. In what world, what genius thought, like, let me piss off the North American economy, the European Union economy, and then let's go fight, China, right? If we really wanted to do this in an effective way that I think would have made all of us stronger, we should have been coordinating with our European partners, Canadian partners, Mexico too, to make sure that we come up with a deal that takes care of all of us and at the same time moves our aims forward of either decoupling from China and or making China be a little more aligned with some of the standards that we've all been set. But instead, we decided to go pick a fight first with the European Union and then go fight China. So going forward, I hope if we ever engage in this, that we understand that the European Union, like, there are literal friends. We have many countries in Europe that we actually have a net export balance with, and some of them actually really felt it. When I was in Germany talking to CEOs and whatever minister, they were mad because, like, you told us decouple from China, let the United States be your trading partner, your major trading partner. So we did it, and now you are cutting us off. And now we are trying to figure out where we can get our next market. And you're telling us also, don't go settle China. Don't go get more integrated with China. And what this president did, I think, left such a distaste for our trade policy with our friends that it's going to take a while to recover. But I'm hoping that as much as China learned about how to fight us when it comes to trade wars, that we learned also from the mistakes of Donald Trump.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to open the floor to question, and maybe firstly, to the ambassador of Greece here, Lessika. Thank you for being here.
Yasu.
If you could share a few comments, and then we'll open up to the rest of the group.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing. Thank you, Senator. And I see that you can, of course, say hello in Greece. You've spent
I got
more than that.
Tekanis.
Oh my God.
Tekanis. Kala para po ikala.
I assure you that it's more than enough, and it shows that you spent a couple of months or more in Greece. You loved Greece, and so let's take the discussion a bit closer to Greece. But before that, I would like, Alexandra, to congratulate you on your new duties as the president of GMF, which is a policy organization for more than a half century, and it is very important what you're doing here. And also, it would be equally remiss of me not to pay tribute to the former colleague, Ambassador Alexander Philon, who spent also some years here as ambassador from 1984 to 1989. What years also 1989 is also a marking moment for what we are discussing even today. So I'm very glad that both of you refer to the transatlantic relations, and I also believe that transatlantic relations cannot be overstated. It is arguably one of the most successful examples of multifaceted cooperation, and it's been working well since the end of the Second World War. And I would even say that some of the great successes we had after the Second World War were when the United States of America, Canada, and Europe we were going hand in hand. So this is something not to be underestimated. And I'm glad that you referred to some new ideas. And it's good that Europe has started already building its own defense, which is something that is not being done at the expense of others or against others. All these are complementary efforts, and I strongly believe that in the end, these are things that take the transatlantic relationship even further and maybe to new successful developments. And you rightly referred, Senator, to the fact that trust is actually trust building has to be exercised. It's actually a muscle. You've got to train it. Trust is a muscle. And now I would allow me to go closer to my country, Greece, which has been consistently committed to the transatlantic relationship in both deeds and words. At every critical juncture from its particular geography, my country has contributed in many ways to strengthening the relationship. And I'm talking about geography, since Greece is situated at the crossroads of 3 continents, and it's actually nowadays in between 2 major crises. Well, it's been proven that Greece is a stable and reliable partner, and this is happening in a volatile region. Greece is a security provider, not only for the United States, but for the transatlantic alliance as a whole. We have been contributing for years and years 3% of our GDP to the alliance, of course, for the common concerns, but we do have also our own concerns in the region. It's a difficult region. We are neighboring sometimes difficult countries, and but we always try our best to enhance this transatlantic relationship, and I would refer even just as an example to our efforts into enhancing maritime security, especially in the Red Sea recently, which is a vital sea corridor for global shipping and global supply chains. And actually next Tuesday, during our presidency in the Security Council, we are going to have a great event there, a high-level debate chaired by our Prime Minister on strengthening maritime security through international cooperation and global security. Greece, over the past few years, we have actually tried to give solutions once after the war, after Russia's war in Ukraine, the movement East-West and West-East in Europe was blocked. We tried to give a solution through a new vertical corridor, and we opened one of the Greek ports in Alexandroupolis in northern Greece, where we contributed actually into the energy security in Europe, into transporting not only personnel, but also defense articles. It was something that gave depth and, if you want, a breathing space in Europe. Not only in Europe, that was an idea which expanded, and it can work also in the future for transport, for digital, for energy, a broader vertical corridor which would go through Greece, and it could start and it could help Europe up to its north and going through Cyprus, the Middle East, and even India, and it could be a better and safer alternative to Belt and Roads initiative. I strongly believe that the American presence in the Eastern Mediterranean can always be helpful, and especially in strengthening initiatives, regional initiatives, which can serve as stepping stones for the day after in a new Middle East, if you want. And there are several initiatives and platforms with countries in the region that Greece is having a strong relationship, like Egypt or even Israel. And I know that the United States is a partner to these regional initiatives, and we believe that the engagement should remain there, because that's what gives hope and a perspective in the region. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Maybe some reaction, especially on that,
Sure.
that strategic nod.
And you know, I do thank Greece, because Greece is what actually gave me my love and interest for foreign policy. When I was a young boy, I actually won a scholarship to go study in Greece. And not many kids from the south side of Chicago go to Greece, or anywhere actually. And when I told my friends, like, I'm going to Greece, they're like, where is that? I'm like, oh, this is why I'm going. And I got to stay about 3 months in Volos, Greece. And coming from Chicago, you know, the only thing I knew about, you know, Greece was Greek town, Chicago, which is really good food, but that's about it. And that's where I first learned about, you know, the Greeks and the Turks and the whole regional issue at the soft age of 16. But that actually was what propelled me really to continue my love and interest in foreign policy. And if not for a couple of very weird turns, I probably would have ended up at the State Department as a foreign policy officer instead of the Senate, which I think is an upgrade for now, but I have not decided. The one thing I would say is, like, our American orientation to Europe is very much west to east, and it's not north to south. So when we think about solutions, we're always thinking about west to east. And I think that's something that has been a lot of kind of lacking in kind of innovation. Some of it is just geography. You know, for many years, you know, Greece and Turkey were the only countries, NATO countries. Everything north of that was, you know, part of the Soviet bloc, or even post-Soviet bloc. They just weren't part of the EU. And so when we look at solutions, we tend not to think that way. And I think going forward, I think we should, because there is some great opportunities, whether it's, you know, from you know, solving the surge problem in case we ever have to surge men and manpower and goods into weapons into Europe, or it's an energy solution. You know, we still need to make sure that whatever we can do to make Europe energy independent, which I think is important, but especially energy independent from Russia, is in the long-term interest of us. And some of that will require, the United States and allies to bring in LNG and other types of petrol to basically starve, I would say, Russia of their capability to fund their wars. But it will also be beneficial to these countries for them to actually be able to have good, stable economies. And one of the things that some countries that should remain nameless did incorrectly, I think, for the last couple of years, is making themselves more integrated to Russian gas. But the solution going forward, I think, it has to also be a north-south alliance, especially when you're dealing with China. I mean, China is very smart. They know that where our weaknesses are in terms of some of our deep friendships. I think Greece, luckily, is not one of them, but certainly can be. And the one thing that we have to make sure we don't do is to fall into the Turkey trap, as I like to say, where Turkey has the largest army in NATO. I question if they would be there for certain Article 5 commitments, but it is a massive economy. You have two good relations between presidents, between heads of states, I should say, between Erdogan and Putin. But we have to be keenly aware that there needs to be a balance to that. And I think you kind of see that when we sold F-35s to Greece, but then we sold F-18s to Turkey. That is a very good example of a good balance that we need to continue to keep. And also recognize that really, if you see what has happened in the last 10 years in Greece, they have really stepped up. Now, have they stepped up monetarily? No, it's a small country. But, opening up bases, I think in Larissa, the opening up a base in Larissa also, which I visited a couple times, very good feta cheese in case you ever, a lot of fat U.S. Air Force guys now eating feta cheese there. Even my old city of Volos, they have an agreement there where we have some barracks that we can use for training. Those are, and the expansion of the MQ-9 bases. This is a really good example of how we can work together, build alliances, continue to build our alliances, continue to build strength and trust by real exercises. And I think we should continue doing that. And hopefully we could re-engage or restart our, the training exercise, Alexander the Great, because I think that was another good example of how you can, build trust, have integration, and kind of continue moving our relationships forward.
Thank you so much for this. I want to take a couple of questions. So please here.
That'll be quicker at my answer.
And we'll take 3 or 4 questions. Please, sir.
Thank you. My name is Robert Benjamin. I'm with the National Democratic Institute, NDI. The security agenda, defense, energy that you speak to, I think is very clear. The politics that are of the moment are seemingly far less so. I mean, it's astonishing and troubling for many to see the wholesale change coming from the highest levels of the U.S. government on commitments to the transatlantic relationship. And it is about isolationism in many respects, but there's also, at best, maybe a transactional, at worst, one can argue perhaps a more hegemonic sense of things. And I'm curious to ask, both in your senatorial capacity and the visits that you're making, but also as a representative of Arizona, and with respect to your constituents, how do we, and going maybe to what the Greek ambassador was just articulating, how do we situate the relationship as beyond transaction and beyond immediate interest, to emphasize collective security, shared prosperity, and democracy and human rights? That is the binding agent, that is the purpose and the mission, arguably, of the transatlantic community. How do we get there at this point?
Well, I think you do have to start first with that transaction. It's not necessarily the transaction between heads of state, but it's the transaction between our domestic constituency, understanding that international relations and trade is beneficial to them directly. And one thing you see now, for example, Arizona largely was kind of, our interest in foreign policy was whether the Canadians were going to come down or the Mexicans were going to come up, right? And that was kind of our whole world. And then we started getting into kind of higher end manufacturing, right? When we have TSMC, and that's going to have 6 chip manufacturing fabs that will end up totaling probably close to 18,000 high-paying jobs in a place that was not known for that type of work. And what you're seeing is the Arizona now being more interested in trade and international relations because they realize that it is directly going to impact their paybook. And so step one is we should embrace the transactions, right? Make sure that there is, as much benefit to our relationships so people can actually tie it together. I was taking a tour a couple of weeks ago of one of the chip plants, and I went to see one of the, God, I don't even know how to describe it. It is a UV imprinter, right? It's made in Germany. That UV imprinter, because of tariffs, is now 10% more at a minimum. That one imprinter costs $200 million, but TSMC cannot function without the imprinter. And so when I talk to other Arizonans about this, like, 10% is not that much. And I tell them that, like, oh my, that is a lot. I'm like, yes, it is. But I think we have to first figure out how to make that. And some of this, it might have to be at some point, some really smart politics where we have European companies that want to cite themselves in the United States. You guys should just do it the way that we do it in the Defense Department. Cite your companies in really smart areas that have political pull, right? One of the things one of the smartest things I've seen is, Mercedes-Benz has been able to, I think, have a lot more sway with the representatives from South Carolina because they're huge employers down there. And, seeing that type of like ground up constituency makes a big difference. And once there is economic alliance, I think it's easier for us to argue for security alliance. The one area that I think we just never really talked about as much, and I think because the manner of which we got out of Afghanistan, as well as the American proclivity to just forget everything, was that who was with us in Afghanistan for 20 years, up to the last minute. Many of our transatlantic partners, right, that were there from day one, that declared themselves. And I've always been a very big fan, and I've talked to many nations about this, that, if you have any Afghanistan veterans or Iraq veterans, for example, I've said this to the Canadians, I've said this to the Danes, like, you should go on a tour of the country and visit all of the veteran organizations and kind of give them a reminder, like, hey, we were there with you. So that way it's easy, I think, for us to be politically separated. And lastly, I think you asked what do I say when I go over there? Well, the one thing I tell everybody is, like, I'm here for 6 years. The president's out in 4 years, right? God willing, yes. By the Constitution, it says he's out 4 years. But so our relationship is going to supersede this president. And that's been true for other administrations, right? I've not been happy, with some past prime ministers and presidents of Europe, but I've never let that kind of deteriorate my relationship with that country or my standing and understanding of this country. If that was the case, we probably would never be talking to because of Berlusconi, probably would have ditched Italy years ago, right? And we did it, right? And now we have a very, very tight alliance and relationship with Italy because we have to understand that our alliances, our friendships are going to supersede these administrations, or should supersede, I should say.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself. And I'll go on this side.
Thank you for taking this. Juliane Schäuble, Tagesspiegel. Senator, the immigration issue has clearly influenced elections on both sides of the Atlantic in recent years, and mainly to the advantage of right-wing parties on the conservative side of the political spectrum. How do you see the attempts of the Trump administration to form some kind of transatlantic alliance in this, the pushing of the AfD in Germany before the election? And how could centrist or center-left parties react to that? Do you also have to form some kind of alliance?
Yeah. So my best political advice I give, if your opponent's setting up an ambush, you don't actually have to walk into that political ambush, right? And consistently, we do that in the center kind of left parties across this country, across the world. But I also think we do have to have a grander conversation about where immigration and illegal immigration fits into our platforms. And what is more important to us? For us to make sure we have, what we understand is kind of liberalism, or having a very liberal immigration policy. In my opinion, our understanding of liberalism is that I would rather have that and have restrictions on immigration instead. So I'd rather restrict immigration to make sure that we have democracy, to make sure that we continue to have free market capitalism, to make sure that we have labor rights, environmental rights. And the one thing I feel that we miss in this kind of center-left parties across the world is that we're asking our base and our constituency, we want them to give us everything. And what are we asking? When it comes to foreign policy, trust us that we're, your wages have not gone up and everything is not looking great on that front. Trust us with security, but also we're going to allow a lot of, asylum seekers into this country, and we're going to give them money. Like, it just doesn't work out. We have to make a decision, and it sucks that we have to say that, but like the base voter, and I'm pretty sure it's not just the United States, is pro-immigration reform in moderation. And I saw that in Arizona, and I've talking to colleagues across the world the same thing. But if we want to hold power, part of our coalition can't be also saying that we're going to allow as much irregular migration. It just doesn't work. It's proven over and over again. And if you saw this last election, the economy was improving, right? Were people really feeling it yet? Not quite yet, but the economy was improving. That election should have been closer. But we as policymakers in the United States messed up. There should not have been close to, I think it was like 6 million asylum seekers coming to the border in 3 years. As an Arizonan, I saw it. And there was no exaggeration. It was as bad as it looked. And for a country that the United States is used to order, it's used to at least some level of safety, it was jarring to them. And instead of us coming up with a solution, because we were afraid of getting people mad within our political circles, we did nothing. Now we lost the election. And of course, you've seen all the other consequences that are going down, right? So we're losing on the environmental agenda. We're losing on the international policy agenda. We're losing on the labor agenda. We're losing on all these things because of the one thing we could have done is moderate ourselves when it comes to border crossings. But we don't, because we're afraid of, as we say in Arizona, pissing people off. But we're going to have to choose. And that's how we're going to be able to stop these right-leaning organizations, which a lot of them are being fed by foreign interests to separate us, right? And it's, we know that Russia is actually essentially sponsoring some of these migrations in order for them to actually destabilize Europe. But because they're doing it, doesn't mean we have to play along. That's it.
Thank you. I'll move to this part of the room, please, in the back here, and then I'll move to the left.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming in to speak with us. My name is Arthur Pichitowski, and I'm an institutional sociologist. So I want to ask you a question a little bit about the structure. What I really like about how you're presenting everything is we're on the cusp of something new. And it's not a position of emotion, but a position of strength. How do we figure this thing out as we're entering into all these possible innovations that can take place right now? And it's forced innovation. But I was kind of wondering, what are the opportunities in this forced innovation that you see from your specific perspective of being a U.S. Senator, where we could improve on the old transatlantic relationship? So there were weaknesses in that old system as well, and we're forced to change it. So better insight, faster comprehension, alignment in terms of how we think. When we think of defense, we think of Europe as having to stand up in terms of monetary contributions. But what about the United States in terms of understanding the importance of defense in Europe? How do we get to these people-to-people type of relations? And could that experience that you had with the GMF in terms of leadership groups, do we have to work this way just to have people have direct contact with each other through some way? And that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not just GMF, but I think and GMF is a great organization, but you're already getting grass tops. What we need to do is figure out how to get your basic American to have a understanding or appreciation of foreign policy, but most Americans don't have passports. There's tons of Americans that will never leave a 20-mile radius of their home, except maybe for a vacation, but that's about it. When I got that scholarship to Greece, my only experience leaving the country was to go to Mexico. That's where my family's from, so I'd go work the farm, then come back. When I went to Greece, it just opened up my eyes to the world. But that was because I happened to find a scholarship. You had to, someone had to have been self-motivated to go looking, this before the age of the internet, for these scholarships, find it, apply for it, and get it. I do think we need to have a better version of an exchange that brings Americans from everywhere to the world. And, in some ways, it'd be a version of, we used to have AmeriCorps, now that's gone, but a version of AmeriCorps where we would send young men and women to go work. And when I'm talking about young men and women, I'm talking about 18, 19-year-olds, go work at an embassy, go work at a foreign base. Go work at an American nonprofit overseas, but specifically targeted to people that weren't really likely to ever leave the country, right? Because of the circumstances they were in, because of, the families just don't know what's available out there. And if you can do that, I think you'll build a longer and stronger relationship, not just with Transatlantic, but with the idea of having an international and outward-looking mindset. Because if not, you're just sending the elites and their kids, the elites of the elites overseas, but it never really trickles down as much further down. One of the things that I think we all thought the advent of the internet and the ability to communicate cheaply, that somehow the worlds would get smaller. People would be talking to each other, everything else. It actually hasn't. We've actually become more isolated, even though it's become cheaper to travel, to talk. Now you have almost automatic language translation, but yet people are still extremely silent. And I think what has not been replaced is the fact that we have to do those person-to-persons. But in the meantime, that's a long-term solution. In the meantime, yes, we need to be doing the actual conferences. The conferences not just at the levels of the Senate, but what German Marshall Fund did was tap me and another man named Bakari Sellers, who you see on TV, to go and be part of the German Marshall Fund training program. And that type of those types of programs, but on steroids, I think is what we really, really need to do.
Thank you very much. We'll need to. Oh my God. Sorry. So we don't have any time left. Okay, but sorry. So we'll continue around Colombian coffee,
yes,
and things to eat. But just Senator, huge thanks. I think this was extremely instructive, and it really resonates. I mean, with what GMF is doing. I hope next time we'll see you in Arizona.
Yep.
Because I think you're absolutely right. That's part of what I want to strengthen here at GMF is to also bring this conversation outside of the Washington bubble. And so we have this program called Across America, which is about really engaging with, the local leader, the city's representatives, the younger generation, the universities, and bringing these conversations outside. So hopefully we'll do that with you in Arizona. Best of luck with everything. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights, and see you very soon.